Hello and welcome to Turtle Tracks Podcast. I'm your host, Brian VanHooker, and I'm here with Ciro Nieli, who is the executive producer on the Ninja Turtles 2012 series. How you doing today, Ciro?
Pretty good, Brian. How are you?
Good. On behalf of the fans, thank you for legitimately creating the best turtle show ever. It's really, truly is.
Thank you, man. I'm glad to be here. That's flattering to hear. That's nice. It means a lot to me.
Well, I mean, I'm going to get back to the beginning later, but honestly, I wanted to ask my most pressing question up front. What happened to Pigeon Pete?
Oh, I think Pigeon Pete just, he just ate some bad birdseed or something. I think the line, wasn't it like, we don't talk about what happened to Pigeon Pete?
Yes, it is suggested that something had happened. And yet found out, so I've been wondering ever since.
It's one of those things. It's like, I think we always wished we could have had enough episodes where we would go and show that backtrack story. And so it's never been fully written, but it was just this idea of something completely absurd happening to him. The thing about Pigeon Pete with me was that there was early on, it was actually Pete Pigeon, and Pete Pigeon was a very different character. Pete Pigeon was actually like, imagine just like a guy like with a mustache straight out of like 1978 in tight jeans, but no t-shirt, but he had like 2 chicken drumsticks on his back, like chicken, like horrible fried chicken wings, like a mutation that went wrong. So the idea that he was more man than chicken. Okay. And so I think somewhere along the way, like instead it became, the other way around, Pigeon Pete, where he was more pigeon. And I think there was some idea that, like, did he try to reverse retro mutagen himself and became that horrible, unfortunate, deformed, flightless man bird?
Yeah.
With like, and there was like I know there was like a no shirt, no shoes, no dice kind of thing that was like going to be a runner with him. But yeah, and then we just, the show ended and we never got there. There's a lot of shows we didn't make that we used to joke about, especially about Casey.
I spoke to Peter DeChico maybe a year or so ago on this podcast, and he was sort of explaining that, like, he didn't know, but since Mondo came in, he kind of filled that comic void, and it just seemed to make more sense to stick with Mondo. So, yeah,
that makes sense. You mean Mondo Gecko, right?
Yeah, Mondo Gecko. Yeah.
There's too many guys, like that was a hard show to like, and then, there's the practicality too of making a show is you have a price cap on the talent that you can bring in terms of the actors.
Sure.
So, and like your average show is not that high. And I think on Turtles, we got it to 10 voice casts, which is like an extremely large number, but you got 4 Turtles, a Splinter, a Karai, and April, which are always kind of like gonna be there, and then Shredder shows up, you're already at like 8, so it's hard to go like, well, now we're gonna have the Mighty Mutanimals, and it's like, well, there's one of them.
Right, sure.
We never, like, it so sucks. Like if we did a movie, you could do like 20 Mutanimals, it'd be wicked, but I think Gecko was way cooler too. I mean, he had so much, Robbie Wrist is so awesome. I mean, not to downplay the performance for Pigeon Pete, but I think Mondo instantly, like those episodes were really strong. That first episode for Mondo,
that was maybe my favorite episode of that whole series. Is Mondo's introduction. I remember like totally geeking out, hearing his voice, getting the cowabunga in there. That's maybe my favorite episode of that show.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of like it tied a lot of like the nostalgia and the vibe of what Turtles was for. In a lot of not just generations, but like, mediums, like whether it was toys, because I thought the toy was great. And then the skateboarding thing was such a pop culture staple of the early to mid 80s, and to be able to kind of like, to me, he was like a Bones Brigades character. So like, and then of course he said it, the Cowabunga thing. It just felt like it really cemented like the good times aspect of Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
And what that potential was. So I don't know. It was like he was just awesome. Like everything about him. And that was an extremely sophisticated character animation model. I think at that point we were like at some zenith. with like what we were trying to achieve on, like, we had, you know, in the beginning of that show, we had like major limitations on what we could and couldn't do. That's why, like, if you look at, you'll notice it more towards the end of the series. If you look at like a turtle next to, say, like Amando, you're going to go, these guys look like they're from two different worlds. And it was really because there was a certain amount of metrics that we were told to follow, which is the amount of detail that could render to afford like our budget. And I think it was some weird number. Like in the beginning, it was something like a turtle could only, like a character could only have 12,000 polygon, whatever that means, right?
Okay.
And I think by the time you got to someone like Mondo, it was probably more like 120,000.
Oh wow.
So like you're getting things like, that's why like the toes and stuff on the turtles look all like chunky, you know, like it was like, it had to be stylized to be able to achieve it because, you know, just previous, the only thing that Nickelodeon had made in CG was, what was that show? It was a comedy show, but it was like very simple. And I'm not knocking the show. It was just cartoony. And it was not like, it didn't have the requirements that you would need for like a fully realized action show.
Sure.
You know, where like characters are scaling walls. There was scale issues. There was, you know, you can't just, all of a sudden it wasn't about two characters having a conversation on a couch. It was like, they have to be able to stand on a windowsill and get on a rooftop. And it was insane. It was an insane show to make for Nickelodeon. It was a big first time adventure. And, you know, but with every show they learn and get better. So like they're making a Star Trek show now, which is like going to be like completely incredible looking. And like a lot of the same guys who were on Turtles are going to make that show amazing. Like, so that's something to look forward to. It could be really beautiful. Like all new technology too. Like even though my show ran for, I think we were making that show for like close to 9 years. Like we were trapped with the technology that we started with. You can't go like, even though the technology improves, you can't just go, we update. Like you have to stay with what you started, or else you'd have to do a complete overhaul of every asset that you've ever built, which makes them unaffordable. You know, so it's like switching your car from like from a gas to diesel car. Like, oh, it doesn't matter if you have diesel. Like you gotta stick with the gas car. So that was a little painful, but anyway, that's real techie.
No, that's good stuff. I mean, like, one thing I wanted to ask you was like, how, when a show like that ends, what happens to the assets? Like, where do they go?
They might show up in Star Trek. If they have an episode they can't afford, and they go back to like, you know, to like Earth in the 30s, maybe we'll see a brick building show up or something. I don't know, or like a fork.
Sure.
I mean, that was the cool thing about that show. Like I was. And there's a whole reason why I didn't continue there, or that show didn't continue. And it wasn't personal. It's just like the way business goes. But there was this fantasy that, or the right of mind that, hey, we're not just making a turtle show. What we're doing is we're building a digital studio, complete with a digital soundstage, complete with incidentals that we can call up at any point to walk around, and a whole prop house. Like whether you need a 1968 Lincoln, or if you need like a kitchen knife, like we got everything, like a blender. Like we had made every single thing possible. And so, yeah, like the idea was like, if I got a new show moving forward after Turtles and it was some sort of action Earth-based show, like I would have reused every single piece of Turtles.
Oh, wow.
Make it, like, it exists like a soundstage. It's just there. It's not just a soundstage, but it's like a studio lot. It's like a fake city and everything.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
But, you know, who knows where that stuff is now? I guess it's archived and sitting on some hard drive somewhere. Sure. Like shortly after Turtles ended, I made a 4D amusement park ride using all those assets for Ninja Turtles, but it was overseas only. We didn't get to see it here in the States.
A mall not that far from me has some of those turtle ride things.
Oh,
on your Turtles.
Yeah, you're by the Mall of America?
No, the American Dream Mall, the one in Jersey.
Okay.
There's like a Nickelodeon land, and there's some turtle stuff in there. I didn't go. I was like, oh, I'll go at some point because it's a little pricey right now. When I stumbled upon it, and then the pandemic hit, so you still haven't gone. But there's some turtle shit in there. So,
is it? Do you know if there's a like it's almost a like it would be like one of those theaters you sit in? It's a 4D movie, and then there's like interacting lights and scents, and like they spray water.
I don't think so. I think it's more like little roller coasters and stuff.
Okay, yeah, because I did. That's what I made. I directed and. We got it made with some of the same animation crew. It was like it's about like an 8-minute short of the. It's pretty cool.
Oh wow! I need to find. And hopefully it's on YouTube or something. I have to check that out.
I don't know. I don't know if it would be like I've never seen anything happen with it. Like it was supposed to be in Spain and like Portugal and the UK. They told me, but I have not. Like I didn't get to travel to see it, but.
Right.
It was pretty wild, and it was cool because we got to use the same exact assets that were used in the series, but they were we used a different rendering pipeline, which gave it real light, like actual light fall on the characters, which actually never happened in the series. Like the series, we cheated the lighting.
How? I mean, like I have no technical brain whatsoever, but like, what do you mean you cheated it?
The one tell is if some character walks through a room. And there's, a light change as they enter the room, you would see it like cascade over them. So like we would do a thing instead where we would create a mat and the light, we could do a change of color on the character as they moved around space. But there was no actual, because you're not actually rendering light falling on the characters, which is a whole complete render, like, it's a full character render. So like you're able to render things a lot cheaper and faster. So yeah, like having that, real lighting on those same models was kind of extraordinary. It looked amazing for that little 8-minute thing. It was nice to finally see that, but I don't know. Maybe some kids in Spain got to enjoy it. It was weird.
Rewinding back to the beginning a bit, I wanted to kind of get into your history. So you grew up with the Turtles. I mean, were you into the cartoon, the comics? Like, what was the Turtles for you when you were a kid?
Well, for me, it was mostly just, I discovered that first issue of the Mirage book, like when it dropped. Like it wasn't, I didn't buy it after the fact. I was there when that book came out. And if you know anything about the history of that book, I was fortunate. I grew up in Philadelphia. That book did not travel too far away from that northeast corner. Like I don't think that book got past Chicago, and I don't think it got as far south as Florida even. So yeah, I got that first issue, and I kind of completely it kind of blew my mind, because on one hand it was this like hard driving adult kind of dramatic, action movie thing. And on the other hand, it was so odd. It was like it had its own charm and personality that was nothing like the DC and Marvel stuff that I really enjoyed. That was all I knew really up until that point. So it kind of blew my mind. And the nods to Frank Miller I was familiar with, so like it was right up my alley. Like I was really into that.
Cartoon. Did you get into that too? Or?
The cartoon came along, and I was just, I was the guy that was telling everybody that the best thing in the world was Ninja Turtles comics. And then, all my friends, they wouldn't go to comic shops and stuff. So what did they know? They didn't care, and they didn't look into it. And then that cartoon came out, and it kind of it backfired on me because it was like a baby show. And not to shade on that show. It's just, they're just two completely different things.
Yeah.
And that was a different time. Like, I tuned into the show excited, and like my jaw dropped, and like I just didn't know how that thing was kind of a possibility.
Sure.
You can have two things that are the same thing, but not at all the same thing.
I was one of the kids that grew up on the cartoon and then discovered everything else afterwards. So like, yeah.
I talked to a lot of people that way. Like I was talking to my friends last night who were really into Gremlins, and they're all into Gremlins 2. And I was like, Gremlins 2 is such a baby movie. It's like, I don't understand why I was trying to be Looney Tunes when like the first one was a kid's movie that like was actually like a disguised horror film. And they were kind of like, yeah, well, that's our age difference. They're like, we got to watch Gremlins 2 first, and then we saw Gremlins later on video, and it was like the good stuff. So it just made their love for Gremlins stronger. And I was like, I felt kind of gypped. Like I think I'm in this like very specific zone where like everything I liked got worse. And like the people that are like 3 or 4 years younger than me all got to see things get better, like by watching VHS, like in retrospect. Like even like,
wrong, but I feel like I heard that Joe Dante preferred Gremlins 2 because he was kind of let off the leash a little bit, which is interesting to me because I kind of was always of the belief that was better, but like I kind of love, they're two very different animals, and I kind of love them each for what they are. Weirdly,
right.
I mean, I'm surprised to hear Dante preferred 2, which I don't know if that's true or not because I could be making it up. So
he probably I could see that. I mean, he's a big like Looney Tunes guy, so I feel like that was his like love letter to Chuck Jones and Termite Terrace, and I think that's what he wanted to do. I mean, I can't hate on that movie. I like it too. I'm a huge Rick Baker fan, so like there's stuff that Rick Baker did in that movie that just kind of blows my mind. So like, yeah, no, like Gremlins 2 is really cool. I mean, especially now. I mean, it's practical. Like it's just totally like, I think when you're like, I don't know how old I was for that even. I can't remember. I might have been more like like 14. I was just kind of like, what is this? Like, I don't understand why this is happening now.
It's wildly different.
It's wildly
little crazy-eyed gremlin or a little crazy-eyed mogwai that just like I love it, but it's a completely different planet.
Yeah.
The first one.
Yeah.
You know, back at Turtles. So how did you first get that position? How did you end up pitching your show to Nick and making the Turtle Show?
Just normal. Like you hear about something, and they were kind of just taking interviews and pitches, and so my manager just set up a meeting, and I just kind of went in, and you know, it was a weird time. Like I think I was a little naive about like the actual breath that Nick was taking to find talent for that show. So I kind of went in just acting like I was the only fish in the pond because, you know, it was an action show that was about to start, and I knew all the action guys in town, and they were all busy. So I kind of went in thinking like, not that I was the greatest choice, but that, you know, I was the only one that was available. You know, I was just kind of like, oh, here I am, I'm the turtle guy, let's do this. And they were like, wait, what are you talking about? And I go, well, what do you mean? And they go, well, you know, I was like, this is kind of my shit. And they were like, yeah, everybody says that. Congratulations. Prove it to us. And I was like, wow. And it literally went that way. And the guy who was in charge there at the time of development, his name was Brooke Burke. What was his name? He was Burt. Yeah. He was like, I felt like he almost like kind of challenged me, and I went away for about 3 weeks and like wrote and drew a bunch of stuff and came back and did like a full blown presentation on like boards, like actually like printed artwork out pretty big and you know, discussed it as I scrolled through my art, you know, physically. And he was just kind of like really, really, really excited about it and like was like, oh, okay, I believe you now. Like, this is cool. So I kind of earned it. I just, you know, it was a different time though, man. Like it was everything was still like kind of analog back then. Like the digital explosion in animation had not yet happened. You know, when we started out, everything was, I think the previous job, I was still doing storyboards on paper, you know? So it was a different world. Like to be able to walk in with like actual drawings and impress them was cool. Everything now is like, you know, super painted and like, you know, they do like PowerPoint presentations and Procreate and everything's like very fancy. And I think the execs are very wowed by like just the like shiny things, you know?
Sure.
I think back then, you know, the execs kind of like put their faith in me, and it became like, and I loved it because it was kind of like, there was a lot of respect there, and there was kind of a relationship where I was set up to succeed, you know? So I felt confident in what I was being asked to do. It wasn't like I could lose this job or they want to replace me or I'm not up for it. So, it was a nice time creatively. It was busy, but it was intense, and that development period lasted maybe a year plus before the show like actually officially got greenlit and before I got officially hired full time as like the showrunner.
Oh wow.
I had kind of like a truncated temporary paycheck to be there drawing it full time. Like it was for a while, it was just me. Like I think for the first 6 months I was there alone, just day and night drawing. Like, they come in and be like, draw Shredder now. And I would draw Shredder for 2 or 3 days and we'd look at it. And it's crazy.
Oh, cool. Wow. I mean, you can tell though, I mean, the amount of a fully realized world it is just like, it's spectacular. One thing I wanted to ask you about it too is like, there's so much new original stuff in it, but there's also a part of that that's like kind of the best of everything, like the best from the movie, the best from Mirage, and like and the old cartoon. So like, I was curious about how you pulled in that old source material. Like, did you have any sort of method to it at all, or?
Geez, it wasn't necessarily like a plan. It was just like, I mean, there was definitely a roadmap for how I wanted it to play in the beginning, which was enough to get going without thinking about it. And then towards the end, like, as you get to like the middle and moving forward, it takes on a bigger life. It becomes, Playmates is involved and Comic-Con rollouts are involved and press and media. Like you're doing like press stuff through the media and everybody wants to know where things are going to go and what the hook is. And I think that was kind of around more like season 3. And I think that's when you started having to go, well, they're asking us kind of to start mining the past and doing like the best stuff cuts. But, in the beginning, it was more like, it was smaller. I mean, the stories in the beginning were more about the Turtles, and the goal for me was more about developing the relationships and making those characters seem real. So things like, the first season very much is about the Turtles still being boys under the guard of their father. And the second season is more about them finally like getting on their own. So it was more broad things like that. Like the other stuff is just details and extra stuff to just kind of help you. I think what was happening in the beginning, we had a lot of problems. Like they really, the assortment of toys is a big thing with Playmates, like what ships in a case. And they wanted like endless monsters, and it was really hard in the beginning. And I had the support of my 2 writing partners at the time, that we were kind of backing them off because we didn't want to do a monster show in the beginning. Like we thought it was a bad idea to have a show that was called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and that the turtles weren't special in their mutation. That like there were just 4 mutants among like a sea of 100 other mutants.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like a kind of ill thought. And everyone kind of bought onto that and like kind of agreed finally. So that was good. So like we were able to make more of a show that was, about the martial arts and the history and the family feud. And it was like turtles freaking out humans like that. I like that better, Yeah. And then season 2 became kind of like, the levee kind of broke and Playmates was kind of like, we need our monster assortment figures. So, I think season 2 was more like, we used to call it like Monster Madness or Mutant Madness. Like it was like, let's just open the floodgates and start bringing in the best of cuts. And, I really love monsters. So to be able to look back at those, we look mostly at the figures too, not even the old show. Because I thought there's something a little bit more ageless and iconic about some of the toys.
Sure. Yeah.
The animation of the show sometimes makes things look a little odd. But like, if you have like for instance, that like that old Mutagen Man figure is awesome. I couldn't wait to the Mutagen Man story. So like, we had a lot to pull from, and a lot of it was the toys. As much as I had like fought off Playmates in the beginning, like it was that show completely embraced Playmates. But eventually season 3, everyone was kind of more of an expert, like the execs, like everyone involved, the press. and they were pushing on us to do like they were kind of pushing their will on what the story of the show was a little bit more. Like, you guys have to do this now. You guys, but it was more about pushing sales, like, not so much story. They wouldn't tell us what stories to tell. It was more like, we need these many things to come out this fast, vehicles, whatever.
Sure.
So it was kind of difficult, to have the creative meet the commerce and kind of live like in harmony in a good way. But that's how it always is, though.
It kind of like when you got to Northampton, like you got to kind of bring in a lot of your horror influence. Because I know you're a big horror guy. Like, once you get to Northampton, you seem to have some fun with the Creeper and other characters that are like these monster of the week type things that worked pretty well.
Yeah, but we caught some shit for that, though. Like, I think it was a little too horrifying at times. And then there was one story that we planned to make that was killed, and it got replaced like twice. That story got killed, but it would have been the things are planned and then they can get shuffled around. So it might have been like the fourth or fifth story we had, but it ended up coming out where we ended up having to come up with a completely innocuous, goofy second episode for that season, which is the Bigfoot, transvestite Bigfoot episode.
Okay.
Which I still like, but like tonally, it's so jarring. Like, there was another show that slotted in that place that we had planned that got canceled.
Well, what was that episode? Can you share that?
It was it was going to be our Halloween episode, actually. It was going to fit in a little bit later, I think, so it aired right around Halloween, and it was basically the boys are in Northampton, and they had never trick-or-treated before, so like they're all getting to talking with Casey and April about it, and then there's like, it's like late at night and it's dark out, the sun's down already, and there's a knock at the door, and a boy's there, and it's a boy wearing like a Halloween costume, like an old like Ben Cooper or like Collegeville, like the what do they call it, like a vacuum form plastic mask with the elastic.
Okay, sure.
So he's kind of like a sweet little kid, and they let him in, but the kid ends up being, not what they expect. He ends up being like the spirit or ghost of some dead boy, like in a mutated like corpse body, like that fused with his Halloween costume. And it ended in some kind of like crazy battle in the afterlife, and like the network just like lost their shit. They were like, "This is not happening. Not after you did like Friday the 13th, Evil Dead, The Thing, Exorcist. Like everything is in like those first 5 or 6 shows is just like Fangoria greatest hits." They were just kind of like, and they were concerned. They were like, "You're not turning this into like a fucking horror show." Like I think it was like, that was the kind of joy of working with Brandon, because I kind of grew up with Brandon, and him and I read those magazines. So like we kind of didn't realize that we had encouraged each other into doing that. And we thought it was perfectly fine. But the network, I get it. Like, I understand their shock and their concern, but I think we were always doing things with the best intentions in mind. We weren't trying to subvert or be terrible. I truly believe that if you scare a kid, you actually trick a kid into becoming like secretly obsessed with your project. So you're imprinting on them. So it probably made the show more successful. Although a lot of people tell me they hate those Northampton shows, and
really?
It's the same people. Yeah, and it's the same people that don't like. Though it's Turtle fans that I get it sometimes, and they tell me like they hate horror. And like, why is this in a Turtle show? So I get it. Like, everyone's different. So, but like, it wasn't my intention to do that forever, and we didn't. There's probably like 6 scary shows like that. Like it's like a show about monsters. I mean, you want to kind of go there.
Sure. Yeah. You got to do it again though a little bit with the Universal Monsters episodes.
Oh yeah. That's got some good frights in it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's
paced. Did you like doing that too? Like, are you as big of a Frankenstein guy where like you got to kind of like dig into that lore a little bit?
Oh yeah, that's the good stuff. I mean, all that old Universal Monster stuff is kind of incredible. Yeah, that was fun. I mean, that was really crazy. That show is kind of beautiful. I just wish we could have made it as a movie, and if that was the case, I would have paced it a little slower. Like it actually, like I've watched it. It's great because it's like I think it aired as 4 episodes. 5, yeah. So if you can imagine watching those 5 strung together, which I have, it's like it's a little exhausting. Like but that's the rub, right, of making 5 separate episodes that get strung together as a movie. They each have to work and be entertaining as a kid's half-hour cartoon.
Sure.
And then you go like, so it's like, you have 3 acts per episode that end in extreme action. So you got 5 of them. That's like 15 action set pieces.
Jeez, yeah.
That's like way more than any movie. That's like 3 times as much as any feature. So much. But it was beautiful. Those are beautiful shows.
I think back to the original, like the beginning of the show, like how did you go about casting? Because I mean, like, I think everybody was amazing, but to me, like the casting of Rob Paulsen's Donnie was like the most inspired choice ever. To the point where I don't know, like what? How did you figure out who the 4 turtles were going to be?
Oh, it was pretty complicated. I mean, like it wasn't so black and white. It wasn't like I had a checklist of what I thought they were, and people came in and fulfilled that need. It was a little more open. Well, with the exception of Sipes, I think early on I automatically cast Sipes as I was drawing the earliest drawings. I was like, Sipes is just going to be Michelangelo no matter what. And it wasn't that simple, like they didn't really, I had to convince the network. It wasn't that hard, but the network was like, you can't just say like, it's going to be Sipes. So I was like, okay. But like after a few reads, they were like, yeah, this guy is totally Michelangelo. So that was awesome. So Sipes was the only one I ever legitimately locked down. He was the first one, and he was like locked in no matter what. So he was kind of like the governor for the rest of the ones that come in.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that being said, I think I went through like 3 or 4 Raphaels. I had a Raphael that worked really well like twice before Sean, and then I couldn't find a Leo to save my life. So like while I'm looking for Leo, because I thought that Leo and Raph were really specific on how they played off of each other. I don't really want to say who I had as Raph, but like the guys were like a little bit stronger.
Okay.
They were a little bit, not typical, but they were great voice actors. They just were doing a very specific thing. And then when I found my Leo, which was like so uniquely, like I couldn't have imagined that Jason Biggs character voice. Like I couldn't have imagined that like off the top of my head. Like, but when he came in and did it, we were like, oh my God, that's like a perfect Leonardo. We have to make that Leo. And then because of that, it kind of undid the Raphs we had because the group didn't sound right together. So we went through a couple Raphs. I think we went through a couple Leos for sure. Mikey stayed. And I think there was some discussion of, hey, what do you think about using something from Turtles past actor-wise to be one of the Turtles? And I was open to it. So I think all the Turtles at some point came in and read for all the Turtles.
Oh, wow.
If I'm not mistaken, or it was discussed, or I had auditions sent in. But I know I had Robin in person. I remember that. And, Rob and I talked for a while, and he started doing a thing that it felt to me like it was a little early Woody Allen. And it was kind of right. Like, it was kind of like this nervous energy that lent itself to comedy. Like a self-deprecating kind of thing, but not like a pushover. Like he could get upset, and it was also like different enough from what he had done, like as Raph previously.
Sure.
And I really got along with Rob so well that like I was like, can we just like lock this down? And I think I had it. It was like between Biggs, Aston. Yeah, because Sean Astin was last. So once I got Donnie, so then all of a sudden it was like, I remember it was like, because it took a year to cast.
Wow.
Like we couldn't find them. So it was like Mikey Forever and Raphs. But the Raphs ended up getting replaced because I found a Leo finally. And then I didn't have a Raph. Then I found Donnie really quick. Because it was like because I was doing the heritage thing with the 80s show. And then all of a sudden, I remember when I worked at Disney that Sean Astin was doing a voice for, because it was not something we would assume like, hey, because Sean Astin did this after Lord of the Rings, but Sean Astin had already done some voice acting at Disney while I was there on something else. So we thought we'd ask him, and he kind of nailed it out. Like he like knocked it out of the park. And that was it. Like once it kind of completely worked perfectly. Like having Sean, Jason, Rob, Greg was just like unbelievable. Like it was perfect. Like because it was really about, because we had them all, like we had them temp cast, and we would have all 4 actors working together, and if it didn't sound right, we had to recast one of them.
Sure.
So like the 4 had to sound different enough. They had to have different textures, and I like that Raph ended up not being like, you know, he wasn't like, everyone was coming in and doing like this hard ass with like a Brooklyn accent, you know, which is obvious, and it's like,
sure, yeah,
he has a little bit of that in there, but there's no accent, and we thought that the softer Big Brother thing kind of worked better. That Sean was able to turn on. So yeah, casting was crazy for that show, and then there was, you know, the big Jason Biggs kerfuffle. So
yeah,
that kind of went on and on and on. But the Jason, you know, at that point, Sipes was good friends with Sean, with Seth Green, who ended up being Leo, and introduced me to him, and we hung out a few times. And I think, you know, like Seth's one of those guys, like we're almost the same exact, I think we're like a few days apart. We're almost the same exact age. We came from the same town. And he, you know, I think I kind of got like, I think I really kind of like took a liking to him when we started talking about G.I. Joe and stuff. Like he's like a real,
oh yeah,
he's a real like legit like nerd, and like you know, geeking out on like G.I. Joe Marvel Comics issue like number 21 with him. I was like, yeah, this dude gets it. And like, you know, he waxed on like Mirage a lot. Like he understood the Mirage angle, and he geeked out on like the Leonardo one shot was like his shit. So I was like, well, you're doing it. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it was like the only way, I think, you know, people had already liked the Jason thing sucked. I hated that happened, but like, and it was, there's reasons why it had to happen. Like it could not happen. It was out of my hands. And the only thing that kind of, I think for the fan base to save face, I think Seth Green helped placate that pain.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
He brought a certain amount of cred that I think people went like, what? New Leo? Oh, wait, that's not bad. Like, you know, it was kind of...
honestly, I had that too, where Biggs was excellent, and then Seth Green's really good as Leo, but I know his voice so well. It took me like a good 4 or 5 episodes where I was like, okay, this is Leo's voice now. And then like I got used to it, and he's fantastic as Leo.
It's weird, right? And then we tried to shoehorn that whole neck injury thing in there.
Yeah.
Which was cool. I mean, it's the old Mark Hamill Empire Strikes Back car accident trick, but you know, what are you gonna do? It
worked. I mean, it all worked, and Seth was a fantastic Leo. He really was. I mean, like we'll get into this in a little bit, but like all the stuff that was done in Tales, the storytelling in that. I mean, there's so much good stuff there. So
yeah, I know. Jeez, that was a crazy show. That's a crazy season. Tales killed me.
Well, let me ask you, why did, out of curiosity, why did it end up changing format after 4?
Well, we ended the storyline. I kind of felt like, you know, like, so it needed, I mean, some shows do that, but I mean, I felt like, you know, there was the story that we were trying to tell. I've been in a situation before where I've made shows I couldn't finish. So not understanding the climate, like, and being able to foresee where things were headed, like I wanted to make sure that I had closure on that saga. Yeah. So we ended the real business at 4, knowing that there was all these other stories we wanted to tell, and we could just tell them out of sequence, and it didn't really matter. Yeah. And it wasn't about them not being canon. Like everything's canon. It's just we got to just kind of jump around and do it as we wished. And if we got like another 10 seasons, hey, that's great. We could have changed the format again, but we didn't know what was doing. The toy sales had peaked, obviously, like, it wasn't no fault of the show. I mean, you can imagine, like, you got like 124 episodes. The toy sales probably peaked more in the middle. So, the writing's on the wall at a certain point where it's like, how long are we going to keep doing this? Because it was technically driven by toys, that show, not ad retail space. So, we had to make sure we got our story out. And I was like really worried about that. So, and we, to testament to the show, like, it went well enough that we were able to do like another 20 stories. So, or episodes. So it wasn't bad. Would have done some more if I could have, but I don't know.
Working backwards from the Splinter's death thing, one thing I wanted to talk about was your Splinter, which I think is the most like dynamic, interesting Splinter. Like, just before we spoke, I rewatched the Yokai story. You see Splinter as this sort of arrogant character, and then like in the Lone Rat and Cubs, where he's sort of this embittered rat creature. Your Splinter is so dynamic that I just wanted to talk about him a bit because it's just fantastic.
I think I owe a lot of that to Hoon. Like,
absolutely, yeah.
He's like one of the most incredible guys that I got to meet. Like, it's one of the best relationships I made on that show professionally, for sure. And he's a great guy. Like, he perpetually blew my mind on that series. He brought such a gravitas to it that I had only dreamed of. It bothered me how, in the beginning, the whole thought process behind the change on Splinter was, it was all means to an end. I did it simply. It was all scaled back to April. So you're going like, visually, you're going like, how tall do these turtles need to be for me to be able to have them move around the city, and for me not to have to make two sets of everything? Like, sometimes we did. Sometimes I had to make a chopstick set that April could hold, and then we did all different chopsticks that the turtles could hold.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because it's a scale thing and it becomes a technical thing. It's not about drawing. It's about these things exist as models in space. So, things like doorknobs, everything becomes a fucking problem.
Sure.
So everything went back to the governor for all of that was April. And like, is April going to be able to kiss Donatella or whoever it's going to be? Like, we don't want the turtles to be midgety or like dwarfish. I don't know what the word is, but like tiny.
Sure.
And we don't want them to feel like grown-ups. So the only thing to do was to make Splinter huge. Because like I had to cement for that first, and it was the way we shot it too, but like we had to cement in that first season that Splinter was their father figure. And that was the first decision that really informed his visual look. And then I think between that alone and like we would do extensive research into like actual Japanese textiles and like things from the Edo period, and we were pretty thorough about Japanese history and the arts, in a lot of different ways. I had a lot of help too. But also like, Hoon's voice then on top of that was just like incredible. Like, and I think it lent itself to a certain kind of character, who was like, and the writers in the beginning were great too. They were like really adept at doing this kind of like snarky, almost like half sadistic father figure. Jennifer and Josh, who were my co-APs in the beginning, they were like the writing team. They had done shows. They had launched and I think gotten the 70s show off the ground. So I really liked their brand of humor, and they really understood like parenting humor and that kind of sitcom format. And it really kind of shined, I thought, in that first season.
Oh yeah, he feels like I think I read it in one of your notes or something in the art book, maybe, I forget. But you're going for more Obi-Wan, less Yoda. Is that right? Or
yeah, that makes sense. Like it's a guy. I think we're thinking about like, this is a guy who's like 50, not 65.
Sure. Yeah.
Like he's still formidable. Like,
oh yeah,
these are young boys, and he's, he's an older guy, but like he's not down and out. Like when I was a kid, I think when I was watching the Fred Wolf cartoon, it always kind of bugged me. Like I always felt like I had to I would lose my patience with like Splinter walking across the room and kind of dragging his lines. Why is he so sleepy? Like get on with it, man. Like slow doesn't equal wisdom. I didn't feel like necessarily. So yeah. I that was and plus it was a chip for me not to change other things in the show. It was cool to go into Nick and they would say, all right, well, what's your take on the show? And I would go, April's like this and Splinter's like this. And they would say, well, what about the Turtles? And I would say, well, what about them? I would be like, Raph's a rude dude and Donnie does machines and Mikey's a party animal. Like, I'm not changing that. And it was like there was battles about that stuff, but it was like, look, I'll change April into anything we have to not mess up the story and to not mess up the Turtles.
Sure, yeah.
And then I'll adjust Splinter. But like we're not like this is a new show, but like this isn't necessarily like a reboot. Like I didn't want to like reinvent Turtles. I wanted to make a love letter and then try to encompass the best of what it could have been or had been.
Yeah, and it does that because those four characters are very much like there's certain accents that are cool. Like Donnie's a lot more frustrated in this show, and he's more like there's this philosopher thing to him that I've been a Donnie guy since the beginnings, but I genuinely feel like had I grown up with your show, I might be a Mikey guy because his episodes are my favorite. I love Pizza Face, which I think he's an episode some people didn't like, but I love that episode.
Yeah, they hate that one.
I love it. Oh, man.
Yeah, I think I was a Donnie guy growing up from the comics.
Okay.
And then, but when it all came down to Roos, like I kind of became a Raph guy just because he kept the red bandana.
Sure, yeah.
If that makes any sense, because I was like such a weird Raph guy. But then it got hard because like my best friend was Sipes and he was Mikey, and it's like, well, I kind of had to say Mikey's my favorite. But then like, honestly, I think if I had grown up with my show in some weird alternate reality, I probably would have been a Raph guy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I just thought there's like such a warmth and like I don't know, and he's such a bad like I love how angry he can get and like the way he can justify it. It was kind of fun. He was always there. I mean, he was such a rock for everybody. But I say that, but I mean, I also loved Leo when I was a kid. I was obsessed with the Leo one shot leading into
oh, it's great. Yeah.
Issue 10. I mean, that blew my mind. That's like my favorite. Like still, like I have a huge comic collection. I have like Marvel keys and DC keys, and I have like a substantial Marvel collection. And like my favorite comics are probably Turtles 10 and the Leo one shot.
I've heard that a lot of times. Like I interviewed an artist named Freddie Williams. He cited that at least one or two people I've spoken to like that comic, and I can see I can see why certainly because I whatever age I kept caught on to the comics, but like that's one that just stands out for people as being a spectacular story where I mean he barely talks in the whole thing. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's a lot of credit to Kevin. For just having a certain amount of like he was kind of in a way ahead of his time with like his ability to lay out a page. I mean, those books are very cinematic. And I know you could argue that Miller was already doing it, but like who else? Like, and like I wouldn't look at those comics and be like, this is just like Dark Knight. Not at all. I mean, it was like to me, Kevin was like he was like a movie director, and I wasn't used to it. I was like reading like you're reading books like Secret Wars or whatever, like John Byrne Fantastic Fours. Like you're just kind of like you're reading the words and looking at the pictures, but there's no cadence or pacing that's coming from how the page was drawn back then. You're just slugging through it the same way you would slug through like a Kirby page where it's just 9 panels no matter what, like flip. Yeah. And you would just do it like it was homework. And you'd be like, okay, I'm absorbing this. This is cool. What does he say? like 9, like Leo and 10 were like like there was times where you were reading faster or slower depending on how it was laid out. And I thought that was like, that's like Kevin's brilliance. I know Peter had a part in it, but so part of me thinks that like I think Kevin was really doing like the page rough layout, the layout roughs.
He still does that for the IDW.
Yeah.
I feel like that's probably in his wheelhouse for sure. Yeah,
that's his thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Back to Splinter a little bit. I wanted to talk about the Karai Miwa story. Was that planned from the beginning? Was that because that's such an interesting part of the show?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that was definitely, and a lot of that I think too came from looking for something to give Leo, because Leo historically is one of these characters that, and every team has one, like even like a Cyclops in the X-Men, where like the guy who's in charge of the team, the quarterback, is kind of like boring because he's just like a little too perfect.
Yeah.
So like you got Leo who's like, he's disciplined and he's straight-laced and he's a Boy Scout and he's like the most fit and he doesn't have bad habits. And it's like, well, what's his Achilles heel, So like Karai was kind of a cool thing, and to kind of walk down that taboo path of like, you're the daughter of my enemy. No, you're my sister. Wait, what? Like what's happening? Like was just like, you could play that any way you wanted for so long. And like we could like, it wasn't just like Leo finds out Karai is the daughter of Splinter. Then Splinter finds out Karai is his daughter. And then Shredder has to deal with it. There were so many layers to peel off of that one concept that like, because we had to walk into rooms and pitch this constantly. We had to pitch it to and Nickelodeon. Like we had to fly to it was one thing to appease the show execs here in Los Angeles. We had to then fly to New York and we had to pitch it to the marketing team. Then we had to pitch it separately to the toy division, consumer products. Then we had to pitch it to like all the execs and the president. So like you really needed something that you could just say like one little thing and they could see like, oh, that has legs, like, and it was a good thing like that. And I'm not saying that like that character wouldn't have existed if not for Leo, but like it really, I think she tied into like what the show's bigger arcs and storyline and themes were. She was we were able, and like in a weird way, you're using her as a way to mine more for Splinter. Like she's the key to the past.
Oh yeah.
Like if it wasn't for Miwa, we would have just like, not found out or dealt with some of the darker stuff that Splinter did. Like he wasn't the greatest guy, he it wasn't so black and white. Oroku Saki wasn't all bad.
Oh yeah.
I love that about them,
That yokai episode, like I said, I just watched this before we spoke, like that it shows so many different, like Shredder seems decent. Splinter is like an arrogant jerk. Like there's so many interesting things going on in that one. I'm curious, how far in advance was that one kind of planned out? The idea that like the Turtles saved Splinter. How far in advance do you remember that one being put in?
Not too far.
Okay.
Not too far. Because like I think that show moved really fast, first of all. Like at some point, and it wasn't like a regular show for me. Like a lot of times I just get a salary that's paid by the week. And on that show, it was so fast and loose that I was getting paid per episode. So at some point I was making shows like, it was like getting war pay. Like I was doing pre-production for season 3 while I was in production for season 2, while I was doing post-production for season 1.
Wow.
So I remember like at any given time, like as far as my duties were concerned, or actually not my duty, it was my duties because I would oversee all of it, but the whole staff at one point was dealing with up to 31 different episodes.
Wow. Mind-blowing.
So like, if you're talking about me going to the very last stage of a show, which is me doing like the sound mix and the color correction, all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum, which would be like me sitting down with Brandon and us breaking a story. That's like, there's 31 episodes in between and including those 2 bookends.
Good Lord.
So like to go like, hey, how far in advance? I don't know, like at least 62 weeks we knew. Because we were doing it at that pace, and every 2 weeks we would release an episode. No breaks. So we made 124 episodes. We delivered without an excuse and no bumps. We delivered a show every 2 weeks for 124 episodes.
Good Lord. Wow.
With
That's
no
amazing.
Vacations.
Good God. That's amazing.
And that fucking hurt. That was hard. And I remember like the execs were like, because it was like we were printing money. So like the toy people, like we couldn't stop. They were afraid that toys would stop selling. So it was like feed the beast, print money. And not to sound like a cheap capitalist, like that wasn't my incentive in making the shows, but that was the situation I was in, and I had to facilitate. That was my job, to facilitate. And I didn't mind, the work was good and I was getting paid. It was just exhaustive. And like I remember at the end of every season, like after like season 3, I think the execs would be like, all right, we're going to do another season. Do you want to keep going or do you want to quit? Like, do I want to step down? Because like, basically like I was looking tired, and I'd be like, no, I'll do it. Let's do it. Let's do season 4. And then let's do season 5. Like, it was like, I remember like constantly. Yeah, it wasn't easy. And I've never been in a situation that was probably that. I've had intense work scenarios, but that one was the most prolonged, intense one. And it was technically difficult, and there was lots of travel. So, yeah, I mean, how far ahead? I would say 62 weeks at the least. But like, I loved yokai monsters, and I love anytime we could bring real Japanese culture.
Sure, yeah.
And early on there was this idea of ninja magic. Like, I even did drawings of it in my early sketches. The idea that like turtles would utilize, not that it was real magic, but like ninja tricks to spook people. Like, that was all like, harnessing some of the ideas that were in yokai culture, some of the yokai stories and legends. Like, so like, it was only a matter of time before we did a yokai story. I think it lining up and being almost like a Turtles in Time episode.
Yeah.
In feudal Japan, like, that's just like kismet. And like, I don't remember exactly how that story came about, but it like most of them, it was probably Brandon and I at lunch. Like, Brandon and I had lunch every day so that we could get out of the office, and we would just take long lunches, and we would basically talk story through the entire lunch. I mean, that's how that worked. And then he went off and worked with writers, and I didn't really have to meet with him too much outside of that, because like we had a relationship that was basically automatic. It wasn't like some annoying, like, oh, now you got to schedule time to sit down with the writers. It was like he would go off and then work with his writers after I would meet with him, like, naturally. So, okay. But yeah, that was a wild production, man.
Going back to the death of Splinter, I mean, was that something that you planned for a while, that you knew he would be some way at the end of the series?
Yeah, for sure. Because I thought like it was, there was a lesson to be learned there. I didn't like the idea that I didn't want some willy-nilly concept that like the turtles could run around stabbing things and killing everything, and that they lived this life of like basically murder and revenge, and that there wasn't consequence to it. So it sucks that Splinter dies, but I think there's like real consequence to that. Like, I didn't want kids to go out and think that they could pull that stuff off and not have to pay some sort of price. And I think Splinter at that point in his life was prepared for that. So in a way, it's okay. It's hard though. It's hard to watch.
Pushback on that? Like, was Nick like not cool with it, or was that like that was all cool because it was like, I don't know how adult you were allowed to get, right?
Well, that's the whole game, right? And then we would kind of do good cop, bad cop. So you kind of wear the network down a little bit, but again, in their own best interest. Like, you're never trying to subvert anybody. So I think at the end of the day, they trusted us, and they really like, some of that writing was so powerful that like they were excited about it. But they're always going to be concerned about like, don't make it play this way. It can't look like this. Like, it's about gratuity. Not so much about the idea. Like, you can get away with almost any idea. It's about the tone and the execution. But that one was just like, that one was like full tilt. Like, it wasn't super graphic, but it was clear, and it was super emotional.
Oh yeah.
And like the score like kind of helped that too. Like it was all full tilt. Everything was full blast, like emotional in that. But I had always wanted Splinter to die. So he was actually dead at the beginning of my pitch. So
oh wow.
Yeah. Well, I needed a catalyst, so
sure.
Like I wanted a different kind of turtle story, and my take on it was kind of like, well, you got these kids, and then they grew up in the sewer. Why the hell would they come out if they don't know anything better? They don't know about the above world. So I thought, well, here's this great opportunity. Like their dad, their father or surrogate master passes away, and they have no choice but to kind of leave home. And that's when the hero journey begins, right? It's the whole Joseph Campbell thing. Here's this loss. I'm leaving home. There's this emotional void. And now they meet April right on the heels of that. And she kind of fulfills that need for them. So like it was kind of a perfect story. And I thought that Splinter would exist throughout. Like you wouldn't be sad because the show would start with him like dead. Like whether you see it or not, it doesn't matter. You don't really have a connection to him.
Right.
But you would learn about his greatness and the connection. And you would make a connection with him through the show as he's giving lessons to Leo, like in flashbacks. Sure. And Leo's taking those and teaching his three brothers. So I thought it also gave Leo, it made kind of Leo Splinter, which gave him something better.
Sure.
But when I pitched it, I thought like the network almost like they thought I was like batshit crazy because I think to them, and to give them credit, like at the time they didn't really know anything about Ninja Turtles, like they just didn't, because and the audience didn't either. Like it was a time when Turtles was kind of dead. I mean, the previous thing had been the 2007 feature, that CG one, so like it had gone like under. I remember going to Toys R Us's and places like that, and you couldn't find a turtle toy in sight. Like there was maybe like a reissue of the Party Wagon, but that was it. There was nothing in sight. Yeah. And I think I came in with such amount of fan cachet in a way that they just went like, we trust him.
Sure.
And we don't really know this. Like we're here to make sure the tone's right. And to them, the tone was, we got to make money and they got to smile on lunchboxes. That's all they know. And I get it. That's their job and that's right. So I had to kind of, like I had to make concessions, and that's the first thing I wanted is like, you can't kill the giant nasty rat. And I was like, all right, that's cool, whatever. And then like there was all kinds of like in the beginning there were some battles. It was a little weird at some points, but I think it all ends up working, like it all ends up working itself out. Like, the thing I hated the worst, I think that happened in the first season was that Dr. Falco became the Rat King. That should have never happened. The Rat King should have been and I like Dr. Falco, but like the Rat King should have been a character that always existed underground. Like he's almost timeless that way. And he was planning to come out, and I didn't think the timeline worked that like now Falco like retreated to the sewers and like it's 6 months later he reemerges as the Rat King. It didn't feel like it made sense like enough. Like the timeline just kind of fell apart for me. But here's the thing. That's just the way the execs worked, and that's the way the toy people worked. Their theory was the smaller the world, the better it is. If you have a character that does this and he comes back as that, that's more ways to think about the toy, and it makes the universe smaller and more cohesive. And I kind of believe the opposite. I kind of wanted I wanted Rat King to be a different breadth of the world. He's not a ninja. He doesn't have anything to do with mutagen. Like, he's this other thing that we never even comprehended that now we got to deal with. Sure. I thought it was another shade of Ninja Turtles, not like a retread of a part of it that we already had, So stuff like that would happen, and like you just have to like swallow it and deal with it. It's annoying, like, But every show kind of has been like that. That stuff happens, and that's when you have to realize too, like you're doing a job and it doesn't belong to you. Like this was like I was the custodian of it, but like I didn't create Ninja Turtles, so you have to kind of be like respectful too. So it's difficult.
You know,
Although we were right. So that game's still awesome.
he is awesome. Another thing I want to ask you about the Splinter's death is kind of like what goes into those big, like those huge, once a season fight sequences. Like, how did you guys board those? Because if there's like 65 characters in a scene, like how did you guys do that?
Dude, I didn't board those shows. I had an awesome. That's when I officially went, I'm not a board artist anymore. Because I started like in this town as a board guy, and like I don't want to be a board guy anymore. Like they've taken it to like a crazy level, and part of it's the technology. Like I said, like I've boarded stuff a lot that's been on paper, and it's a whole different breadth and pacing when you do it that way. It's definitely less drawings. Just to put in some sort of perspective, like one act, a show has 3 acts, and each act would have at least 2,000 drawings. And and that was done within a period and we had a healthy schedule, and healthy is 6 weeks, like, which is not that much when you think about it.
Sure, yeah.
So those guys don't sleep. Those guys and gals, like they're I mean, how is it done? They're just incredible talents. There was a handful of people on those shows that were fine. No one was on that show that was not good. And then there were a handful of people that were just exceptional beyond comprehension. and they were coachable, which was great. Like a lot of the people on that show were so green but hungry that they were coachable, and I was able to kind of push their buttons and get them really excited. And they were just, they did not disappoint. So I think the death of Shredder was Sheldon, drew that. Sheldon Bella, who's incredible. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that Sheldon did that was just unbelievable. He did the finale, I think, for Pizza Face too. But yeah, he might have done the 3rd act finale for Yokai as well.
Oh wow!
So you had 3 teams basically, each run by a director, and then there was a supervising director. So like, okay, I oversee the story team. Right under me is a supervising director. Underneath the supervising director is 3 directors, and each director had 3 board artists.
Good Lord.
And then there was maybe 2 revision guys who were on their own schedule fixing the last episode, because a lot of what was going on in Turtles was we had the luxury of having a good schedule and having those spare guys and gals as revisionists. Which you don't normally get in TV production. That was kind of like a luxury back then, at least. So sometimes we would watch an animatic or a storyboard done, and we would throw half of it out and completely redo it. So a lot of why the storytelling is so good in Turtles is because we did it 2 or 3 times.
Oh wow!
And then I would sit in editing, and a lot of times the shows would come in and they'd be 6 minutes too long.
Oh God, that's a lot to cut. Jesus.
So we would chop it out, and I would move things around and shuffle it and take out a bunch of dialogue or take out whole sequences and shuffle it. And we do patch up writing to fix the holes.
I'm amazed you had time for Space Heroes and Bradford and all that stuff.
Well, that stuff was easy. That's just
I just say with having to cut stuff, I would have imagined that would have to go. Those are fun things. I love the Bradford cartoon, was my favorite.
Yeah. So good. And I mean, that stuff was great because the theory with that stuff was that it was bad animation. So we were hedging our bet that it would go wrong, and that would only make it work better. So, and that kind of helped a lot. There was no stress on those things.
Sure.
We had a separate team in Canada animating that stuff in 2D, and except for the Super Robot sequence, which was done in Japan. But the other 4 seasons of the Krognard and Bradford and Space Heroes. What was the other one?
Space Heroes Next Generation.
Space Heroes Next Generation. Those were all done in Canada.
Oh, wow.
Space Heroes Next Generation, though, I was kind of bummed out because my theory was that it was going to be... We just couldn't afford it. And what I wanted it to be was CG, because I wanted it to be a live-action show that they were watching.
Oh, okay.
So the theory being that there was an original Space Heroes, like Star Trek, like TOS, and then that there would have been an animated series on the heels of that, like in the 70s, which is what we saw
right
in season 1, but that later there would be TNG, which would have been live action, which would have meant real, which would have meant it had to be CG like the Turtles. But I couldn't afford it. And then I remember the line producer was like, what if we do it with puppets like Thunderbirds Are Go? And I was like,
God.
what? That now it's like a complete abstraction. I don't even understand what we're talking about. And like, who's gonna make, I don't want to build puppets. I don't have time. Like, it was like we were gonna do it real cheap. And I was like, no, that's kind of sounds impossible. So I just made Glenn do it. Glenn Murakami designed all those space heroes, the Next Generation characters, and they're amazing.
Is there a desire to see the Space Heroes mapped out in some way, some greater?
Yeah.
Blank.
Oh, is there? I wish. I mean, I think that's canceled by a Nickelodeon Star Trek show, but yeah.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, the Space Heroes as a show. They were asking me for spin-off shows, and at one point, like, they just kind of weren't down because you would go, like, one show I had was, well, just because what you asked was, I thought it would be cool to do, what did I call it? It was, I think it was like Michelangelo's Cowabunga Cartoon Cavalcade.
Oh, wow. Okay.
What it was a half-hour television show, which is like a commercial, like it's a 22-minute cartoon episode with 3 breaks, so you could do 3 acts.
Sure.
But it would have been like these 80s mega show blocks where at any given point you had 3 different shows playing.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
you would tune in and it would be like 7 minutes of Krognard, 7 minutes of Space Heroes, and Bradford or whatever, even new stuff. But like every once in a while, because we had it already, you would cut back to the Turtles' living room, and the Turtles in CG would be reacting.
Oh, okay.
Like as bumpers, not like necessarily like Beavis and Butthead. That was just a way for me to like kind of grow out of that franchise, but to keep it going and to also not step on the idea that like there could be a Turtles reboot,
Yeah.
but still not make the fans like completely miss Mikey everybody.
Yeah.
Like we could have literally just done Turtle, Donnie, Raph, and Mikey, Donnie, Raph, and Leo like being funny brothers watching television, and like
Oh, yeah.
been very healing, I thought, as an experience for Turtle fans that liked the 2012 show, and the network thought I was fucking crazy, and then but I pitched it like 18 times, and then it would have been the easiest show to make, I swear. Like it was already like. It just would have been fun and easy, which I needed. I had a show that was basically, it was Casey teaming up with Jack Kurtzman, driving like basically driving across America, like in a Winnebago, looking for monsters, like being like not cryptozoologists, but more like like some kind of Art Bell coast to coast crime duo, because I was like really into Kolchak, and that's really who Kurtzman is kind of Kolchak.
Yeah.
And I just like the idea of being able to have Robert Forster come in every week and beat Kolchak with Casey Jones. I was like, dude, that's like the best show ever. And they didn't get it. They were going for obvious stuff like a team of girl ninjas led by April, and I didn't really think that was like. That's so kind of basic, Yeah. It's kind of a discredit to April too. I feel like there's more to her than that. Like I didn't want to do like a team show that was just like novel because of the gender. Like I didn't think that was enough. Like I wanted to be weird, but then they kind of went with just like Rise, which was like a total reboot. So it didn't even matter.
Right. One last thing I wanted to ask you about. Sorry to keep you so long. I wanted to ask you about the Wasteland episodes. Now, I know some people like to see that as a what if, but that is the finale, right? That's the finale of the show.
Oh, yeah, that's the finale.
Yeah, I've known this from the beginning.
I don't know. That rumor came from a couple. It's not even a rumor. It was misconstrued, like sound bites from, I think, Brandon and this other guy, Felipe, who my good buddy Felipe, who ended up doing the model for that big future RAF. And what happened was, I think Felipe posted an image of what he was working on and said, like, this is like an alternate version of like RAF. And Felipe, didn't try to stoke like what if rumors. I think people they hear what they want to hear.
Sure, yeah.
And they just want like, no, it's not real.
It's so like, and I think whatever, but I think the fact that it was aired not at the end too, probably to some degree, makes people wire it differently. Even if it doesn't matter now.
And that was the network too, being like kind of cold feet. Like I think they wanted a TV stunt where the ending was all about, like I said before, like smiling lunchboxes. So if I could do a story where it was like all about pizza and hanging out with the 80s turtles, that's the ending. That's where they're going to put all their advertising. They don't want to put their advertising money into like some depressing movie about like the apocalypse. And like, even though it was like the most glorious, badass thing ever done, like I love that story.
It's great.
I'm kind of bummed. While I was working on that, secretly I had made my own cut of it, and it was also widescreen. It was like and it was anamorphic. It was like, the aspect ratio was 2:3:5. It was in scope, and it has alternate scenes and it has like cursing in it.
Wow!
And I cut it together, and for a party that we had, like when we wrapped the series, we had a screening and all the actors came out, like everybody that we could remember that was affiliated with the show. And we watched that last movie as like seamless as like, and I re-edited it so that it's like, there's no commercial breaks. Like, so it had to be changed a bit. And I even put like, there's a lot of homages to like apocalyptic movies in it. So I even cut like a fake movie theater, like intro at the front and different, I hang out at the New Beverly a lot, which is Tarantino's theater. So like we did all these like fake Grindhouse trailers and stuff for the front. And we watched in this theater and it was like mind blowing. And somehow, mysteriously, all copies of that file disappeared.
Oh my God. Even yours? Like,
yeah, I don't have it. Like I might I might have like a messed up working version of it that's like half done, but yeah, like I'm pissed. Like it took forever, and like I wouldn't know. It's not like I would have leaked it. It's just like I just don't know why. Maybe it was just bad housekeeping. It just disappeared. Like my editor lost it, and it's like kind of weird. But and that was called After the Bomb. That movie was called After the Bomb, which was a throwback to. Which was what we always wanted to make, Brandon and I, which was like a throwback to the Palladium game books. But there was an issue where like part of the basically the Nickelodeon deal that they made to buy Turtles, those Palladium books by Eric weren't really a part of that purchase deal. So they were like, they didn't want us to allude to anything in the books at all, which is why Terror Bears or Dream Beavers, all that kind of stuff happens. But yeah, like so it was called like, whatever, Mutant Wasteland, I think it was called. But our working title in house was always After the Bomb. That was the title for, like, I think I have the title card somewhere. It says After the Bomb. I have
one of those Palladium books. It might be that one. I'm not sure. But
yeah,
that's what I love about that story is like it's super bold, it's unexpected, but like at its heart, it's just about the four turtles finding each other again, which is the beauty of it, and that's what I love about that episode. Like it's just so
and I think people like don't see that in it, which like kind of confuses me. It's like it's kind of like what you wanted Force Awakens to actually feel like, and it didn't happen. Like like it was like they all get to be on screen together, like, and they're old, and there's like there's some comfort in that.
Yeah,
everybody got like. I remember I got in big trouble because it was like, "Are you telling me April's dead?"
Yes.
I'm like, "Well, I mean, she might have died of old age anyway if we didn't kill her because of a bomb."
Yeah.
And I got in big trouble for Casey's skull.
I was wondering about that one. That must have...
like I got labeled for being morbid and sick, and I tried to explain to them, it's like, you guys are really not understanding like these characters. Like in fear of whatever could happen to you, like whatever angry call you might get from a mom, that pales in comparison to doing this character a disservice. Like Casey Jones is pure metal. Like he would love to know me. He went out this way. Like that his head was the trigger for a bomb that like took everything out. I mean, that's the most heavy metal shit.
Yeah, he would have dug that for sure, Casey.
I couldn't even hear Gungala like in the explosion. Like,
oh, can you?
Thing. Yeah, and then I think one of the things that was in my alternate cut was Raphael like says something like "Smile for me, you son of a bitch," like Roy Scheider in Jaws. Like he actually curses.
Oh, that's awesome.
Just like, like when you're watching it, you're like, "What am I watching? This is the greatest." I remember I was sitting next to. I think I was sitting next to Rob Paulson and Sean Astin, and they were both the whole time, "This is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. I can't fucking believe this. Are you kidding me?" They were like freaking out. They're like, "This is the best movie I was ever in." I was like, "You're in Lord of the Rings." Like, what are you talking about? You're in Goonies. Like, they were tripping. And I was like, I think that was a really like kind of like special moment for me. Like, even it was bittersweet because it was the end, but like, man, that felt good doing that. Like having those guys go out in that blaze of glory was awesome. And it ends like, it ends in a real place, like, which actually cements it like in reality with our Earth. Like that's actually the quarries that are in Bloomington, Indiana. Cause I'm a huge, like my favorite movie is Breaking Away, which is like a bicycle movie. And it was actually I never really talk about this. I don't think I talked about it. I don't know if I talked about it in the book, but one of the references, like you could talk about the Goonies and you could talk about Stand By Me all day, just with like a bunch of boys bonding as like the foundation for like their camaraderie and how I would pitch, these brothers and their story for the Turtles. But it really was about these cutters, these characters that were in this movie from like, I think it's 1979. It's called Breaking Away. And it was like these kids that are like, that kind of grew up together, and the camaraderie that they have was always something that like when I would see that movie on television as a kid, that I was always kind of jealous of, being like, because I had an older sister that was like, into Duran Duran and Boy George, and I just couldn't relate, and I would watch, so to me, like Ninja Turtles, like I was looking for that thing, and it was Breaking Away. So where they hang out in that movie is a quarry, and where that story ends and what could potentially become their future headquarters.
Oh, wow.
Is that giant quarry lake that you see at the finale of the show. So like I had this whole premise for like what the extension of that would be, and like would they have would they reband, and would they have a new subterranean lair, and yes to all of that. Like I would do stories past that Mutant Wasteland.
You made reference to your art book, which I wanted to talk about that a little bit. I mean, I love that book. It could have been 800 pages and I would have just loved it more. Like I could have had so much, like it's such a great collection. So I don't know if you want to talk about putting that together, but like it was such a great book.
Yeah, I agree. Like I wished it could have been 5 volumes. Like if I had my way, I would have done one book for each season.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
And you can kind of my one gripe about the book, and it's not a regret because there was nothing I could do about it, was I wish there was enough space on the page where I could have written everybody's single name on every single thing that everybody drew. But like, but I had to forego that with like, because they were giving me examples of art books and they weren't inspiring, because it would just be like one page and the whole page would just be like one pencil sketch of one idea. And I was like, dude, this is 124 episodes that spans so many ideas. Like,
yeah. So
we started talking about like, because there was this whole vibe in the beginning of Turtles that it was really punk rock, like just the way the first issue was made in a punk rock way. Like it's almost like a garage band. Like Kevin and Peter made that book almost against the odds. That like I wanted the show to feel that way, and then that book kind of felt like I just wanted to feel like a million things slapped together. Like it was just like aggro that way, and I really wanted it to be like a cool book for kids to look at that were interested in animation, and to just kind of like be flooded with so much imagery, that it was like you had to go through it 100 times because like you're just there's so much to digest.
Oh yeah, it's jam-packed. It's great.
Yeah, but it's a cool book. Like, I made that book basically for free. It was so painful. That's how book deals work. It wasn't like I wasn't getting paid. They were like, we're going to make this book no matter what. So we're just going to do it like, because we have like, I think in New York, Viacom has like their book division.
Okay.
They're like, okay, so we're going to crank out an Art of Ninja Turtles book. We're going to ask you, do you want to be involved? And I said, hell yeah, I'll be involved. And they're like, okay, well, it only pays $2,500 ever. And it's like going to take like 2 years to make it. Like,
it's so much work, that book. Good Lord.
I literally worked full-time hours for 9 months. And I thought like, well, like I could use a break. Is like in between jobs, I'll do this book, but I won't get paid. But like I'll have a book, and it's a nice calling card. And like I don't regret it. Like it forever lives on my shelf as like a love letter to what I spent a decade making. So it's fine. But like there's a crazy amount of work, and it's insane how book deals work. Like they don't work in favor of the author. I'll say that. If that book was a hit, my next book might have been okay.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so. Like, I think this is what it's like, because it wasn't, again, like the money goes to Viacom because they own Turtles. It's not like I make anything off of that. So, but I love that book. I wish it could have been longer. I think I lobbied to get like an extra 11 pages. Like,
oh, wow.
Yeah, beyond what it's supposed to have. So. Oh well.
Share any what might have been season 6 stories? If not, that's fine.
Well, there were some. We got 20 episodes at the end of season 5, and it should have been 26. So we had more episodes there.
Oh, okay.
I think the Neutralizer story would have been larger. Was part of it. It got condensed, I think, into 2 episodes, and I thought there could have been a lot more in there, more than just the Mona Lisa thing.
Mm.
And then but there was definitely a 4-parter we wanted to do that was about Casey Jones.
Oh, wow.
And about Casey Jones' dad and what happened to him, and about Casey Jones, and like the fulcrum in the story was like finding Casey Jones's lost sister. And then discovering his dad, and the dream would have been that we wanted to cast Kurt Russell as Casey Jones's dad.
Oh, that would have been nice. That would have been cool.
Which was full circle because, when you talk to Kevin about who Casey Jones is, there's a lot of stories, but basically Casey Jones is Jack Burton. So, and Jack Burton, according to Kurt Russell, was John Wayne acting like Elvis. So, like, it's like, Casey Jones. Those are all the references, like, when I was talking to Josh for, like, well, you're basically Jack Burton. He's like, who? Well, he's basically Elvis acting like John Wayne, like, kind of. Like, what? Pork Chop Express. Yeah, so I thought it would have been cool to have Kurt Russell shot. I'm a huge Kurt Russell fan and a John Carpenter fan, so he might have done it. Who knows? I mean, we've asked some crazy people to do shit. Like, we got turned down gracefully by Angelina Jolie. She was excited about it and wanted to do it, but actually contractually wasn't able to, and let us know that her children were huge fans of the show. So
that's cool.
That show was a cool show because it actually like transcended into almost like A-list like caliber of talent.
You got some great people on that show. Like, it's just voices that pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And like usual, like I always like using like, Fangoria people, horror people. Like, I always use Cassandra, who we know as Elvira, and, Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund. I love using all those guys. John Cassier. Like,
I love the crazy like comedian. Like I'm a huge Gilbert Gottfried fan, so hearing him pop up was just it's just delightful to me. I just loved it. Yeah,
and he loved being able to call Roseanne horrible names. I was like, that like tickled him endlessly. I love Gilbert. I'm a huge Stern fan too, so there's lots of Howard drops in that show.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, like if you know about the Howard Stern show at that time, there was like a lot of allusions to the Howard Stern show. Like anything from Richard Christie's band, which was called Charred Flesh of the Damned, I think was the name of Charred Walls of the Damned. Like that's actually like on Raph's drum set. Like
Oh wow.
There's like Beetlejuice jokes in there. There's like Baba Booey stuff. Like, yeah, we were constantly doing like Howard Stern references left and right. I'm sure I would have gotten in trouble if they like, one morning just get a shout out on Howard. I'm sure I would have gotten a call. So I don't know what I was thinking.
I was amazed that you guys got away with the Venus sticker. That one was always surprising.
Oh, why? Because of the.
No, it just seems like even so very slightly like I don't know if sexual is the word to use, but it's like I maybe even getting away with it, but I just loved that it was there, and I was like, oh, they were cool with that. So
yeah, well, the Venus was the I'm from the generation that gave their car names, and usually guys would give every girl I know named their car a guy name, and things were simpler, I guess, back then. But you give your car a lady name, and so we're like, what are you gonna name the Shellraiser? It's like, I don't know, Venus. I get it. Like there was also like there was a lot of stuff we couldn't do, like the front, because it was a subway car, and the front says the front of a subway car has a little placard that says where it's headed or what line it is.
Yep.
And I had it scratched down. I guess Raph airbrushed graffiti wrote "Death from Below" on it, and we were never allowed to use that, like, which sucks. But I had there was another idea after the Turtles show was ending, and it was like the writing was on the wall. I pitched a movie to them, a Turtles CG feature, which I guess would have been like straight to on demand or whatever, straight to DVD, whatever it is, whatever they call it now. But it was about the return of the Krang, and that was really cool.
Oh wow.
That was a story that was going to take place probably. It was going to be all new Turtles, so it was going to be them maybe 19 or 20 years old.
Okay.
And it was going to be basically like more of it was very, very much a horror story. It was like the remains of, because I think after the events of it would have been season 2, I think there's like remains of Krang Prime, or season 3 at the bottom of the Hudson. So that stuff has like somehow with mutagen like attached itself to plankton or whatever, and has become this like sentient ooze that makes its way back to Manhattan, and it becomes this like creature that is unstoppable. And I forget, what did I call it? It was like the Krang Primordius. It was like a humanoid sludge beast.
Okay.
That was made of like Krang guts, like the Blob, but it could like attach to things and possess them. So it was like part Blob and part John Carpenter's The Thing, but it was like Casey heavy, and it was like focused a lot on like April and like her having like kind of grown apart from the guys because she went off to college, and like a final like all the beef had to be dealt with like between Casey and Donnie, and like it was all that, and like older Mikey. It was cool. It was a cool story. And I think, again, they were just like, we hope. But, the reason Turtles didn't happen wasn't a lack of its success. It was just a premeditated decision made by management to reboot things.
Sure.
And their decision, like, it was like, they explained it to me very clearly. Like, one person in specific who isn't even there anymore, she was just like, this is what you do with big franchises. Every 5 years, you reboot it. That's just the way it is. And I go,
it's crazy to me. Like,
that doesn't make any sense, but okay.
Like this is me. I don't know if this is an appropriate example, but like SpongeBob's been SpongeBob forever. Like you wouldn't the way you guys I could see the way you guys did Tales. I could see 10 more seasons of Tales, and you do 10, 15 episodes a season. Like I think I like the rebooting of Tales because it kind of gave it like this new life where it was like, okay, we have these truncated stories. They're either like 5 episodes or 3 or 2 or even Lone Rat and Cubs, which was just one fantastic one. I love the fact that I thought that could have gone on for a long time because you could have just done these short little chapters. And I don't know. I still wish that something would come up with that.
Well, you never know. I mean, would I do Turtles again? I would do my Turtles again. Like, sure. I would dip in maybe. Like, but I don't know if I could do it as long as I did it last time. But I would love to lend myself to, I mean, that's I've become kind of like a turtle ambassador, and I'm cool with that. But there's no regret. There's no, I didn't leave anything really unturned. Like, I just, I'm happy with what I did, and I'd love to come back. I have more stories within that world. But, I was asked to reboot it too, and I didn't want to. I couldn't. Like, I didn't.
Yeah.
I said to them, I go, well, what's the point? Like, I put everything. That show is really personal to me. Like, not just because I was a fan, but I put every aspect of my childhood into it. Like, it's very informed by my personality and life events. And I didn't understand how I was supposed to just kind of do a 180 and go, here's a new version that I love just as much, that I feel great about. Like, it would have just felt like a betrayal. And I really didn't want to recast it. I didn't want to be the guy that fired these 4 brilliant turtles.
Yeah.
So like, I didn't like the idea of a new cast. So in a way, I kind of like passed on it or walked. And like, I don't know if it was a good idea or a bad idea. I mean, it'd be cool to have a job right now, but I mean, in a weird way too, like I kind of had to get out of turtle jail.
Sure. I mean,
plus, like, you
so many
you
great
don't want to
stories.
follow that. I didn't want to follow that.
Yeah, you got to do 124. I mean, as much as like, it's hard because I remember when it being canceled, me being like super upset about it, and much of turtle fandom revolting about it. And I think like it sucks, and I think that you could do 10 more seasons of Tales at least. But like, you guys 124 episodes, it's hard not to be like, and most cartoons last like 3 seasons generally. So
yeah, you're lucky if you get 65. It's not happening. Like 52. Like, now the numbers are crazy. Now you're getting like 20 episodes.
Wow. Yeah. So I mean, like, you got to tell so many great stories. It's like, it's phenomenal. So
yeah, I would do a dip thing where like every once in a while they do a movie that's like, comparable to like a straight video. Do like one a year. If I had some contract where I could make one of those like every 2 years or something, I would do that till I died, because you got to understand how much those characters mean to me. Like, like the life I have now, like, I don't really put much thought into it because, like, it's like thinking about high school. Like, it's just kind of, at a certain point, it's unhealthy. But like, do I miss them? Like, completely, yeah. Like, those guys are like my family. Like, I'm kind of Splinter, so it's hard,
Absolutely. I mean, you can see it in the show how personal and like how emotional it gets. Like I said, the Karai Miwa stuff. There's so much deep shit in that show. It's fantastic. I usually end these by asking the favorite turtle, but I already asked you that. So, do you have a favorite like mutant that's not the 4 turtles?
All right, I'm gonna be quick. I have 3% left on my computer, but I think I'm good.
Okay, sorry.
But if I'm just telling you, just in case I blank out.
No, it's fine. Just shout a mutant and we'll end it.
Oh my god, it's gonna come to me. There's so many good ones. I mean, in a weird way, if you ask me, Rat King's not really a mutant. I just thought he was so romantic and weird in that classical sense. But it's like, I love the Creep.
Oh, sure.
Like, I mean, I love Bernie Wrightson. I love Swamp Thing. I love Man Thing. I love like Plug, all those Marvel guys, like Brunner, like that did Man Thing. Like that kind of Goonies 70s swamp horror terror. And the fact that he's like, and the Rick Veitch story, which was Bloodsucker, which is what I wanted to do, but we couldn't do Bloodsucker. So, because again, like, I think that storyline was a little hands off. So on the fly, Brandon and I came up with this Swamp Thing beast thing, the Creep, and it's just like, that's awesome. That thing's awesome. And I have like a prototype of that toy that Playmates planned the toy to come out, and then they were like, it's too scary. We're not allowed. We're not going to do it. I was like, what are you talking about? It's too scary. It's a toy. You're going to hold this thing and be frightened of it? It's a little plastic thing. And also, like, of course, I can segue easily now because I'm talking about it via Playmates. They had a problem with Muckman. I love Muckman.
Oh, is that Muckman's great? That Muckman for like a weird moment became like super, super rare.
Yeah, because like
that must be why.
Playmates, like, they were going to put it out, then it was delayed, and then they reduced the number because they thought it was too horrifying.
And then they found them. Like,
Yeah.
Years later, it was like $300 on eBay, or whatever, and like 2 years later, they found all the Muckmans and started giving them away basically for $10.
I know. Muckman's dope. So,
He's great. It's a great toy too.
Voiced by my great friend Grant Moninger.
Oh wow.
He was in charge of. He's been on like most of my projects, but he is actually in charge of programming the shows at the America Cinematheque, which is like the organization that cultivates and film preserves, but they play like old movies here. And he's like my old college buddy, like film laureate, like voice actor. He's awesome. He's been Green Lantern for me. Like, he's a funny guy. Yeah.
Sarah, I'm all set here. I just, again, want to thank you for being here. Thank you for, again, such a personal, awesome take on the Turtles. Just on behalf of the fans, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, dude. Awesome. I got 3% left. I did it.
Here we go, it's a lean green ninja team. On this